What would you do if the world told you that your greatest gift was worthless, that the one thing that defined your soul, the passion that kept you alive, was something you should forget? And what if that message came not just once, but over and over again throughout your entire life? This is the story of Sister Eleanor Thompson, a 78-year-old nun living in a quiet convent in rural Georgia. To most people who passed by the old stone walls of St. Grace Convent, she was just another elderly sister in a habit moving slowly through the halls, her white cane tapping gently against the floor. They saw her blindness first, her age second, and rarely looked any deeper. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't possibly know, was that inside that humble aging woman lived a gift so extraordinary that when the world finally witnessed it, millions would weep. They didn't know that her fingers held a kind of magic, that her soul spoke a language more beautiful than words. They didn't know that she had been forced to silence that gift for reasons that would break your heart. Sister Eleanor had spent over 50 years in service to God, living a life of devotion, prayer, and quiet sacrifice. She woke before dawn, attended Mass, worked in the convent garden by touch and memory, and spent her evenings in meditation. To the other sisters, she was gentle, kind, and unremarkably humble. She never complained, never asked for special treatment, never drew attention to herself. But there was one place where Sister Eleanor became someone else entirely. One instrument that transformed her from a blind elderly nun into something transcendent. That instrument was the piano. The old upright piano in the convent's chapel had been there for over 150 years. Its wood was scarred, its ivory keys yellowed and chipped. Some notes stuck, others rang with a slight dissonance. But to Sister Eleanor, that piano was perfect. It was her voice, her prayer, her connection to a past that lived in her heart, but had long since faded from the world's memory. For decades, she had played that piano during morning Mass, her fingers moving across the keys with a confidence that seemed impossible for someone who couldn't see. She knew every key by feel, every pedal by instinct. She played hymns that made the other sisters cry, melodies that seemed to come not from her hands, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere divine. But then everything changed. And Sister Eleanor was told that her music, her gift, her voice would have to be silenced forever. What happened next would not only save that old piano, but would remind the world of something we too often forget, that the greatest gifts often come from the most unexpected places, and that darkness, whether in our eyes or in our circumstances, cannot extinguish a light that burns from within. This is Sister Eleanor's story. And before it's over, you'll understand why millions of people around the world stopped everything they were doing just to listen to one song. Eleanor Thompson was born in the spring of 1947 in a small town outside Montgomery, Alabama. It was a time when the world was still divided by lines of race and class, when opportunities for a black family in the Deep South were measured not in possibilities, but in limits. Her father, James Thompson, was a carpenter with hands that could transform rough wood into beauty. Her mother, Ruth, had a voice that could fill a church and make even the hardest hearts soften. The Thompson family didn't have much. Their home was a small wooden house at the end of a dirt road with 3 rooms and a porch that sagged slightly on one side. But what they lacked in material wealth, they made up for in something far more valuable: music. Ruth Thompson sang in the choir at Bethel Baptist Church every Sunday, and James, though he couldn't read music, could play harmonica by ear, filling their evenings with melodies that danced through the warm Alabama air. Music wasn't just entertainment in the Thompson home. It was prayer. It was history. It was the language of the soul. Eleanor was their only child, born after years of hoping and praying. From the moment she entered the world, Ruth swore that her daughter had rhythm in her heartbeat. As a baby, Eleanor would stop crying the instant music played. As a toddler, she would hum melodies she'd heard only once. By the time she was 4 years old, she could repeat complex rhythms by clapping her hands. But it was on a Sunday morning in 1953, when Eleanor was 6 years old, that everything changed. The family had arrived early at Bethel Baptist for service, and while Ruth was in the back room putting on her choir robe, Eleanor wandered into the sanctuary alone. There, sitting against the wall, was an old upright piano. Eleanor had seen the piano before, of course. She'd watched Sister Opal play it every Sunday, her fingers flying across the keys during the energetic gospel songs that made the whole congregation jump to their feet. But Eleanor had never touched it. Children weren't allowed to touch the church piano. It was precious, sacred off-limits. But that morning, with no one watching, Eleanor walked up to the piano bench, climbed onto it, and placed her small fingers on the keys. She pressed one note, then another, and something inside her awakened. She didn't know what she was doing. She had never been taught, never been shown. But her fingers began to move tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. She was picking out the melody of "This Little Light of Mine," a song her mother sang to her every night before bed. Note by note, slowly but surely, she found the tune. That's when Ruth found her. Her mother stood frozen in the doorway of the sanctuary, watching her 6-year-old daughter play a melody she had no business knowing how to play. When Eleanor finished and turned around, she expected to be scolded. Instead, her mother was crying. Baby Ruth whispered, walking slowly toward her daughter. "How did you do that?" Eleanor didn't know how to answer. I heard it, Mama, in my head, and my fingers found it." Ruth knelt down beside the piano bench, taking her daughter's small hands in her own. "Eleanor, do you know what this means? Do you know what kind of gift God just showed me you have?" Eleanor shook her head. She was only 6. She didn't understand gifts or destiny or divine purpose. She just knew that when she touched those keys, something inside her felt right. Like she had found a part of herself that had been waiting to be discovered. From that day forward, Sister Opal began teaching Eleanor to play. The lessons were informal, squeezed in before and after church services, but Eleanor absorbed everything like a sponge soaking up water. Within months, she was playing simple hymns during Wednesday night prayer meetings. Within a year, she was accompanying the choir on Sunday mornings. The congregation marveled at her. "That child's got the gift," the older women would say, fanning themselves with their church programs. "The Holy Spirit is all over her fingers." Some people drove from other towns just to hear the little girl play piano at Bethel Baptist. But Eleanor didn't think about impressing anyone. When she sat at that piano, the world disappeared. There was no poverty, no racism, no fear. There was just music flowing through her like water through a stream. Her mother once asked her what she thought about when she played. "I don't think," Mama Eleanor said. "I just feel. It's like the music is already there, and I'm just helping it come out." By the time Eleanor was 10 years old, she was playing pieces that most adults couldn't master. She had developed her own style, a blend of classical technique and gospel soul that was entirely unique. People started saying she could play professionally, that she could be someone important, that she could leave their small town and make a name for herself. Ruth allowed herself to dream. Maybe, just maybe, her daughter could have opportunities that had been denied to her. Maybe Eleanor could attend a music school study with real teachers perform in concert halls instead of country churches. It was a dangerous dream for a black woman in Alabama in the 1950s, but Ruth held on to it anyway. James was more cautious. "Don't go filling that child's head with dreams that'll break her heart," he warned his wife. "You know how this world works. You know what happens to people like us who reach too high." But Ruth couldn't help herself. Every time she watched Eleanor play, every time she saw the pure joy on her daughter's face, when her fingers danced across those keys, she believed that somehow, someway, God would make a path. She had no way of knowing that the path would lead through darkness first. She couldn't have imagined that within 2 years everything would change in a way that would test not only Eleanor's gift, but her will to live. The year Eleanor turned 12, the music stopped, and the darkness began. It was a Saturday afternoon in October of 1959. Eleanor, now 12 years old, had just finished practicing piano at church. Her mother had promised her a treat, a rare trip into Montgomery to buy fabric for a new church dress. Eleanor was excited. These trips with her mother were special moments when it felt like the world beyond their small town opened up just a little bit. They were driving home on a 2-lane country road, singing together as they always did, when Ruth noticed the pickup truck approaching from the opposite direction. It was swerving, slightly drifting over the center line. Ruth slowed down, moving as far to the right as she could. But the truck kept coming. In the split second before impact, Ruth made a choice. She jerked the steering wheel hard to the right, throwing herself toward the driver's side door, away from where Eleanor sat in the passenger seat. The truck hit them anyway, metal crushing metal glass, exploding the world, spinning into chaos. When Eleanor woke up, she was in a hospital room. Her head felt like it was splitting apart. There were voices around her, urgent and frightened, but they seemed far away, muffled. She tried to open her eyes, but everything was blurry, like looking through water. She tried to call for her mother, but her mouth wouldn't form the words. She didn't know it yet, but Ruth Thompson had died on impact. Her sacrifice turning the wheel at the last moment had saved Eleanor's life, but cost her own. And while Eleanor had survived, she had suffered a severe traumatic brain injury that would change everything. The doctors explained it to her father in clinical terms that felt like knives: swelling in the occipital lobe, damage to the visual cortex, optic nerve trauma. What it meant in plain language was this: Eleanor was losing her sight, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. It happened slowly over the course of 6 months. First, her vision became cloudy, like she was looking through frosted glass. Then colors began to fade, the vibrant world turning gray. Then shapes lost their definition, people becoming shadows, objects becoming blurs. And finally, one morning in April of 1960, Eleanor woke up and saw nothing at all. She was 13 years old, and the world had gone dark. James Thompson, already drowning in grief over the loss of his wife, now watched his daughter sink into a depression that terrified him. Eleanor stopped speaking. She stopped eating. She spent her days lying in bed, facing the wall, her hands clutched to her chest, as if holding on to something that was slipping away. The piano sat silent in the church. No one had the heart to play it. The congregation prayed for Eleanor, brought meals to their home, offered words of comfort that rang hollow. What could anyone say? What comfort could possibly reach a child who had lost her mother and her sight in one terrible moment? But the worst part, the thing that haunted Eleanor more than anything, was the belief that she had lost her music too. She thought that without her eyes, she would never play piano again. She thought that God had taken away not just her ability to see, but her purpose, her gift, the one thing that made her feel alive. For months, she refused to even think about music. When her father suggested she try to play, she shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "I can't, Daddy," she whispered. "I can't see the keys. I can't see the music. It's gone. Everything's gone." James didn't know what to do. He was a simple man, a carpenter who worked with his hands, not his words. He didn't know how to reach his daughter through the walls of grief and despair she had built around herself. He prayed every night for guidance, for some sign of hope, for a miracle that would bring his little girl back. The miracle came on a night in late summer. James had fallen asleep in his chair, exhausted from another long day of work and worry. Eleanor, unable to sleep, had gotten out of bed and was feeling her way through the house, her hands trailing along the walls. She didn't know where she was going. She was just moving, trying to escape the suffocating darkness that pressed in from all sides. And then her hands touched something familiar. Smooth wood. Cool keys. Her father had brought the church piano to their home, a gift from the congregation who wanted Eleanor to have it. James had put it in the living room, hoping that someday, somehow, she might want to play again. But it had sat untouched for months, gathering dust, a ghost of what used to be. Eleanor stood there in the darkness, her fingers resting on the keys. She didn't press them. She didn't play. She just stood there feeling the familiar texture beneath her fingertips, and something inside her began to crack. The wall she had built around her heart developed a tiny fissure, and through it a memory slipped in. She remembered her mother's voice singing, "This little light of mine." She remembered the first time she had touched a piano, the way it had felt like coming home. She remembered the joy, the pure, uncomplicated joy of making music. And before she could stop herself, before fear could freeze her fingers, she pressed one key, then another, and slowly, haltingly, like someone learning to walk again after a long illness, she began to play. The melody was simple, the same song her mother used to sing. But something extraordinary happened as Eleanor played. She realized that she didn't need her eyes. Her fingers remembered where the keys were. Her ears told her if she was hitting the right notes. And her heart guided everything else. She played that simple song all the way through, tears streaming down her face. And when she finished, she heard her father sobbing behind her. He had woken up to the sound of music and thought he was dreaming. But there was his daughter, his Eleanor, playing piano in the darkness, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. "I can still play, Daddy." Eleanor whispered, her voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "I can't see, but I can still play. The music is still there." James wrapped his arms around his daughter, holding her close, and they both cried tears that were equal parts grief and joy, loss and hope. "Your mama is watching," he whispered into her hair. "She's watching, baby girl, and she's so proud of you." That night marked the beginning of Eleanor's journey back from darkness. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. She had to relearn everything, had to develop new techniques, new ways of understanding music without the aid of sight. But she discovered something profound in the process. She discovered that music had never been about seeing in the first place. It had always been about feeling, about listening, about connecting to something deeper than notes on a page. Over the next few years, Eleanor developed a relationship with the piano that was almost mystical. She could hear things in music that other people couldn't. She could feel the emotion behind every note, the story inside every chord. People who heard her play said it was like listening to someone's soul speak. What they didn't know was that Eleanor had been forced to find her soul in the darkness. And what she found there was stronger, deeper, and more beautiful than anything she could have seen with her eyes. In the months following that pivotal night when Eleanor rediscovered her ability to play, she threw herself into music with a determination that both amazed and worried her father. She practiced for hours every day, her fingers building calluses, her mind memorizing patterns and progressions that most sighted pianists struggled to master. But teaching herself was one thing. Learning properly was another. Eleanor needed guidance structure, someone who could help her develop her raw talent into true skill. The problem was that no music teacher in their area had ever worked with a blind student. Most refused outright, saying they didn't know how to teach someone who couldn't read sheet music or see their hands. That's when Eleanor met Margaret Patterson. Mrs. Patterson was a 72-year-old white woman who had once been a concert pianist in Boston. She had moved to Alabama after her husband's death to be closer to her son, and she spent her days in a small house filled with books, music, and memories. She had heard about Eleanor from her grandson, who attended Bethel Baptist Church, and one day she showed up at the Thompson home unannounced. "I understand you play piano?" Mrs. Patterson said when James opened the door. She spoke in the crisp, no-nonsense accent of old New England money, a sound that was as foreign in rural Alabama as snow in July. James was immediately suspicious. A white woman at his door asking about his daughter. In 1961, Alabama, nothing good could come from that. But something in Mrs. Patterson's eyes made him pause. There was kindness there, and a sadness that looked familiar. "My daughter plays," James said carefully. "Why are you asking?" "Because I'd like to teach her," Mrs. Patterson said simply. "If she'll have me, and if you'll allow it." Eleanor, who had been listening from inside the house, spoke up. "I'll have you," she said, walking toward the door with her cane. "If you don't mind teaching someone who can't see." Mrs. Patterson looked at this young blind girl, with her head held high and her jaw set with determination, and something shifted in her chest. "Child," she said softly, "some of the greatest musicians who ever lived played in darkness. Beethoven was deaf, and he composed symphonies that made the angels weep. You think blindness can stop someone with real talent? Let me tell you something. Music doesn't live in your eyes. It lives in here." She tapped her chest. "And from what I hear, you've got plenty of it." And so began one of the most unusual and profound teacher-student relationships anyone in that town had ever witnessed. 3 times a week, Mrs. Patterson would come to the Thompson home and teach Eleanor everything she knew. She brought with her books written in Braille music notation, a system that allowed blind musicians to read music through raised dots. She taught Eleanor music theory composition, the history of the great composers. But more than that, she taught Eleanor to trust herself. "You're trying to play like a sighted person," Mrs. Patterson would say. When Eleanor got frustrated, "Stop it. You're not sighted. You never will be again. So stop trying to be something you're not and start being what you are, a blind pianist. That's not a limitation, child. That's a specialty." Under Mrs. Patterson's guidance, Eleanor began to develop techniques that were uniquely her own. She learned to position her hands by feeling the relationship between the keys rather than looking at them. She developed an extraordinary ear for pitch, able to identify any note just by hearing it. She memorized entire pieces through repetition and muscle memory, her fingers learning the movements so thoroughly that they could play without conscious thought. But the technical skills, as impressive as they were, weren't what made Eleanor special. What made her extraordinary was the emotion she poured into every note. When Eleanor played, you didn't just hear music. You felt it. You felt her grief over her mother's death. You felt her struggle with darkness. You felt her determination to overcome. You felt her faith that somewhere, somehow, there was light on the other side of suffering. People in the community started talking about Eleanor Thompson again, But now the conversations were different. Before the accident, they had talked about her as a talented child. Now they talked about her as something else, a miracle, a testimony, proof that God could take the broken pieces of a life and create something beautiful. By the time Eleanor was 16, she was playing regularly at Bethel Baptist again, and her performances had taken on an almost spiritual quality. When she played hymns, hardened men cried. When she played gospel songs, the whole congregation was on their feet, hands raised, voices lifted. The music that came from her fingers seemed to bypass the mind and speak directly to the soul. It was during this time that Eleanor received an offer that would test her in ways she couldn't have imagined. A representative from the Alabama School of Fine Arts came to hear her play. He was astonished. He said that Eleanor had the kind of talent that only came along once in a generation. He offered her a full scholarship to study piano at the school with the possibility of attending a prestigious music conservatory afterward. It was everything Ruth had dreamed of for her daughter. It was the opportunity that seemed impossible, the chance to turn Eleanor's gift into a career, into a life. Patterson encouraged her to take it. The congregation celebrated it as a blessing. Everyone said this was God opening a door. Everyone except Eleanor. She thanked the representative politely and asked for time to think about it. That night she sat with her father in their small living room, and she felt the weight of an impossible decision pressing down on her chest. "Daddy," she said quietly, "do you want me to go?" James was silent for a long time. Finally he spoke, and his voice was rough with emotion. "Baby girl, I want you to have every opportunity your mama and I never had. I want you to see the world, even if you can't see it with your eyes. I want you to do something great with your gift." But Eleanor prompted. She could hear the hesitation in his voice. "But I'm sick," Eleanor James said, and the words fell between them like stones into still water. "The doctors told me last month. Something with my heart. They don't know how long I have. Could be a year, could be 5. But I'm not going to be around forever." Eleanor felt the floor drop out from beneath her. "Daddy, no." "Yes," James said firmly. "And I need you to hear me on this. I don't want you to stay because of me. I don't want you giving up your dreams to take care of your old man. That's not what your mama would have wanted. That's not what I want." But Eleanor was already shaking her head. "Daddy, I can't leave you. I won't. That scholarship, that school, none of it matters if I lose you. You're all I have left." "I'm not all you have," James said gently. "You have your gift. You have your music. You have a calling, Eleanor. And it's bigger than this little town, bigger than me." "My calling is here," Eleanor said. And as she spoke the words, she realized they were true. "My calling is to stay with you for as long as God gives us. My calling is to play music in the church where Mama sang. My calling is to use my gift where it's needed, not where it's celebrated." James started to argue, but Eleanor placed her hand on his. "Daddy, I've already lost so much. I lost Mama. I lost my sight. I'm not losing you before I have to. And maybe, just maybe, God didn't give me this gift so I could perform in concert halls. Maybe he gave it to me so I could bring comfort to people in a small church in Alabama. Maybe that's enough." The conversation ended there, but the decision had been made. Eleanor turned down the scholarship. She stayed in her hometown, caring for her father, playing piano at Bethel Baptist, and teaching music to children in the community. Some people said she was wasting her talent. Others said she was making a noble sacrifice. But Eleanor didn't think of it in terms of waste or sacrifice. She thought of it as a choice. Her choice. Her father lived for 3 more years. They were good years filled with music and conversation and love. James got to see his daughter grow into a woman of strength and grace. He got to hear her play almost every day, and when he finally passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1964, Eleanor was there holding his hand, singing him home. After her father's death, Eleanor was alone in a way she had never been before. She was 19 years old, blind, and without any family. The world felt vast and empty, like a dark ocean with no shore in sight. She could have left Alabama then. She could have pursued music professionally. She could have built a different life. But instead, she found herself drawn back to the one place that had always felt like home, the church. Not just any church, but the faith itself, the relationship with God that her mother had modeled, that her father had nurtured, that had sustained her through unimaginable loss. It was in that season of grief and searching that Eleanor heard a different kind of calling. Not a calling to perform or to teach or to build a career. A calling to give her entire life, her entire self in service to something greater. A calling to become a nun. Some people thought she was running away from the world. Others thought she was giving up on her dreams. But Eleanor knew better. She wasn't running from anything. She was running toward something. Toward a life where music and faith could coexist, where her gift could be used not for personal glory, but for worship, where she could find purpose in service and peace in surrender. At the age of 22, Eleanor Thompson entered St. Grace Convent in Georgia. She took her vows, received her habit, and became Sister Eleanor. And for the next 56 years, she lived a life of quiet devotion, daily prayer, and yes, music. Always music. Because even in the convent, especially in the convent, Eleanor played piano, and for more than half a century, the sound of her playing filled the chapel, blessed the liturgy, and reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the places we least expect. But that music, that gift, that voice would eventually be silenced. And when it was Sister Eleanor would have to decide whether to accept the silence or fight for her right to be heard. The first time Eleanor walked through the gates of St. Grace Convent, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, hope. The convent sat on 20 acres of rolling Georgia countryside, surrounded by pine trees and wildflowers. The air smelled like honeysuckle and rain. Birds sang in the branches overhead. And though Eleanor couldn't see any of it, she could feel it. The peace, the stillness, the sense that this place existed slightly apart from the chaos of the world. A gentle voice greeted her at the entrance. "You must be Eleanor. Welcome, child. Welcome home." The voice belonged to Mother Catherine, the Mother Superior, at that time a woman in her 60s, with a warm laugh and a deep faith. She took Eleanor's hand and led her through the convent, describing everything they passed so Eleanor could build a mental map. The chapel with its stained glass windows, the dormitory where the sisters slept, the garden where they grew vegetables, the library filled with books and silence. And then Mother Catherine led her to the chapel, and Eleanor heard at a piano. "We have an old piano here," Mother Catherine explained. "It was donated to the convent 50 years ago, and it's been played at every Mass since. Sister Judith usually plays it, but she's getting on in years, and her arthritis is making it difficult. I understand you play." Eleanor nodded, her heart beginning to race. "I do. Or I did. I haven't played much since my father passed." "Would you like to try, Mother?" Catherine asked. Eleanor made her way to the piano bench, her cane tapping across the wooden floor of the chapel. She sat down, positioned her hands, and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. She chose a hymn she knew by heart, one her mother used to sing. As her fingers moved across the keys, she felt something inside her shift. It was like a door opening, like light streaming into a dark room. The music flowed out of her, and with it came all the grief she had been carrying, all the loss, all the loneliness. She played it all out, poured it into the melody, and when she finished, there were tears streaming down her face. Behind her, Mother Catherine was crying too. "Child," she whispered, "you don't just play music, you pray it." And that's exactly what Eleanor's music became in the convent prayer. For the next 56 years, Sister Eleanor played piano at St. Grace Convent. She played for morning mass and evening vespers. She played for weddings and funerals. She played for feast days and holy days. She played when the sisters were joyful and when they were grieving. She played when words failed and silence felt too heavy. Her music became as much a part of the convent as the bells that rang for prayer, as essential as the bread and wine of communion. The other sisters would tell you that Sister Eleanor's playing was different from anyone else's. There was something otherworldly about it, something that seemed to reach past the physical realm and touch the divine. But Sister Eleanor never thought of her playing as special. To her it was simply service. When she sat at that piano, she wasn't performing. She was offering her gift to God, offering comfort to her sisters, offering her own broken heart in hope that it might somehow help others carry theirs. The years passed quietly at St. Grace. Eleanor's days took on a peaceful rhythm. Wake at 5 in the morning. Prayer. Mass. Breakfast in silence. Work in the garden, her hands learning to identify plants by touch and smell. More prayer. Lunch. Afternoon duties often helping in the kitchen or the library. Evening vespers. Dinner. Personal prayer time. Sleep. And woven through it all, always was music. Eleanor made friends among the sisters. Sister Anne, who had a booming laugh and loved to garden. Sister Margaret, serious and studious, who would read books aloud to Eleanor for hours. Sister Judith, the elderly nun who had played piano before Eleanor arrived, who became like a grandmother to her. These women became her family, her community, her home. But even in the peace of the convent, Eleanor never forgot where she came from. She never forgot her mother's voice or her father's hands. She never forgot the accident that took her sight or the choice she made to stay and care for her father instead of pursuing a career in music. She carried all of it with her, and she poured all of it into her playing. When visitors came to the convent, they often asked about the piano music they heard echoing through the chapel. Who was playing? How had they learned the sisters would smile and say, "That's Sister Eleanor. She's been playing here for 50 years. She's blind, you know, but you'd never know it by listening. She plays like she can see heaven." Eleanor became something of a legend in the small community surrounding St. Grace. Local families would request that she play at their loved ones' funerals. Couples would ask her to play at their weddings. People who were struggling would come to the chapel just to sit and listen to her play, finding in her music a kind of healing they couldn't find anywhere else. But Sister Eleanor never sought recognition. She never recorded her music or promoted herself. She never gave interviews or sought the spotlight. To do so would have violated everything she believed about her calling. Her gift wasn't hers to glorify. It was God's to use. She was simply the instrument, and she was content with that. As the decades passed, the world outside the convent changed dramatically. Technology advanced. Music evolved. The way people consumed and created art transformed completely. But inside the walls of St. Grace time seemed to move differently. The rhythms of prayer and work continued unchanged. The seasons cycled. The sisters aged, and new ones arrived. And Sister Eleanor kept playing her fingers, moving across those keys with the same devotion she had brought the very first day. By the time Sister Eleanor reached her 70s, she was one of the oldest sisters at St. Grace. Her hair had gone completely white. Her hands had developed arthritis that made some mornings difficult. Her white cane was now a necessity, not just a tool. But her playing remarkably had only grown more beautiful with age. There was a depth to it now, a richness that came from 70-plus years of life, loss, faith, and service. The younger sisters at the convent revered her. They would sit in the back of the chapel during Mass listening to Sister Eleanor play, and they would think to themselves that this was what holiness sounded like. This was what a life well lived sounded like. This was what happened when someone gave everything to God and received everything back in return. But even the most beautiful songs must eventually come to an end. Even the most devoted service must face interruption. And even the strongest faith must sometimes be tested in ways that seem unbearable. For Sister Eleanor, that test came in the form of a new Mother Superior, a practical decision, and an old piano that had finally begun to fail. Mother Catherine passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 2023. She was 91 years old and had led St. Grace Convent for over 30 years. Her death left a hole in the community, a silence that felt almost as profound as the silence Sister Eleanor had lived in for most of her life. The new Mother Superior, Sister Margaret DuPont, was a different kind of leader. Where Mother Catherine had been warm and nurturing, Mother Margaret was efficient and pragmatic. She was 55 years old, had a master's degree in non-profit management, and believed that a convent in the 21st century needed to be run like a business if it was going to survive. She wasn't wrong. St. Grace was struggling financially. Donations were down. The buildings needed repairs. The heating system was failing. The roof leaked every time it rained. And with fewer young women entering religious life, there were fewer sisters to share the workload and contribute to the community's support. Mother Margaret looked at the convent's budget with a critical eye and began making difficult decisions. They would close the guest house that rarely had visitors. They would sell some of the unused land. They would cut back on programs that weren't essential. Everything had to be evaluated in terms of cost versus benefit practicality versus sentimentality. And then Mother Margaret turned her attention to the piano. The old upright in the chapel was falling apart. It had been there for 150 years, and it showed every one of them. Keys stuck or didn't sound at all. The soundboard was cracked. The strings were corroded. The tuning pegs were stripped. It had been patched and repaired so many times over the decades that it was barely holding together. Mother Margaret called in a piano technician to assess it. His report was grim. The piano would need at least $15,000 worth of restoration work to be truly playable again. And even then, given its age and condition, it might only last another 10 or 15 years before needing major work again. $15,000 for a piano. When the roof leaked and the furnace barely worked, and the sisters sometimes had to choose between fixing the plumbing or buying groceries, Mother Margaret made her decision. The piano would be sold. It was an antique, after all. Some collector or museum would probably pay decent money for it, even in its current condition. The money would go toward more pressing needs. And for music during Mass, they would use recorded hymns played through speakers. It wasn't ideal, but it was practical. She announced her decision at the weekly community meeting. Most of the sisters nodded in understanding. Times were hard. Sacrifices had to be made. They were sad about losing the piano, of course, but they trusted Mother Margaret's judgment. Sister Eleanor said nothing during the meeting. She sat in her usual chair, her hands folded in her lap, her face expressionless. But inside, her heart was breaking. After the meeting, she approached Mother Margaret privately. "Mother," she said softly, "might we discuss the piano decision?" Mother Margaret's voice was kind but firm. "Sister Eleanor, I know this is difficult for you. I know how much that piano means to you personally, but we simply cannot justify spending $15,000 on an instrument when we have so many other urgent needs." "I understand the financial constraints," Eleanor said carefully, "but music has been part of our liturgy, part of our worship for as long as this convent has existed. To replace it with recorded hymns feels like we're losing something essential." "Sister Eleanor," Mother Margaret said, and now there was an edge to her voice with respect, "we are a contemplative order. Our primary calling is prayer, not performance. The piano has been a lovely addition to our worship, but it is not necessary. God hears our prayers with or without music." Eleanor felt the rebuke like a physical blow. Performance. Mother Margaret thought she played for performance. She thought Eleanor's music was about ego, about showing off, about personal gratification rather than worship. "Mother, I don't play for performance," Eleanor said, her voice shaking slightly. "I play as prayer. My music is my voice in a way that words have never been. It's how I communicate with God, how I serve this community. It's how I've served for 56 years. Mother Margaret softened slightly. "I understand that, sister, and no one is taking away your ability to pray or serve, but perhaps it's time to find other ways to do both. You could lead meditation sessions. You could help with spiritual direction. There are many ways to serve God that don't require a $15,000 investment." The conversation ended there, but the decision had been made. The piano would be sold within 2 weeks. A dealer was coming to assess it and make an offer. Sister Eleanor walked back to her room in a daze. She had faced many losses in her life: her mother, her sight, her father, the dreams she'd given up. But somehow this felt different. This felt like she was losing the last piece of herself that still had a voice. That night she went to the chapel alone. She made her way to the piano bench and sat down. For a long time, she simply sat there, her hands resting on the closed key cover, tears streaming down her face. "I don't understand," she whispered into the darkness. "I've tried to be faithful. I've tried to use the gift you gave me in service to you, and now it's being taken away. Why, what am I supposed to do now?" The chapel was silent. No voice answered. No comfort came. Just silence, vast and empty, stretching out before her, like the darkness she had lived in for 66 years. Finally, Sister Eleanor lifted the key cover and placed her fingers on the keys. She didn't play a hymn or a song. She just played what she was feeling. Grief and confusion and anger and loss all poured out through her fingers. She played until her arthritic hands ached. She played until her tears stopped flowing. She played until she had nothing left to give. When she finished, she closed the key cover gently, almost reverently. "If this is your will," she whispered, "then I accept it. But please, God, please help me understand." Over the next 2 weeks, Sister Eleanor avoided the chapel. She couldn't bear to go in there, couldn't bear to see the piano waiting to be taken away. The other sisters tried to comfort her, but what could they say? They understood the decision. They supported Mother Margaret. And some of them, though they would never say it out loud privately, wondered if maybe Sister Eleanor was a bit too attached to that piano. Maybe letting it go would be good for her spiritually. Maybe she needed to learn to find God in the silence. But they didn't understand. They had never experienced the kind of darkness Sister Eleanor lived in. They didn't know what it was like to navigate a world without sight, to have music be the one thing that made her feel whole, complete, purposeful. They didn't know that when she played, she wasn't just making beautiful sounds. She was remembering her mother. She was honoring her father. She was speaking in a language that transcended words. The piano dealer came on a Thursday afternoon. He spent an hour examining the instrument testing keys, looking at the internal mechanisms. He made notes in a small book. Mother Margaret stood nearby, her face pleasant but businesslike. "It's in rough shape," the dealer finally said, "but it's a genuine antique, and the craftsmanship is excellent. I can offer you $5,000 for it. $5,000. Not even enough to fix the roof." Sister Eleanor, who was standing in the back of the chapel, felt sick. Mother Margaret hesitated. "I was hoping for more." The dealer shrugged. "That's the best I can do given its condition. If you want to invest in restoration first, you could probably sell it for more, but that would require the $15,000 in repairs, and there's no guarantee you'd recoup that cost." Mother Margaret made her decision. "We'll take the $5,000. When can you arrange for pickup?" "Next Wednesday," the dealer said. "I'll bring a team and a truck." And just like that, it was done. Sister Eleanor's piano, the instrument she had played for 56 years, would be gone in less than a week. Sister Eleanor returned to her room that night and knelt beside her bed. She tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. She tried to accept what was happening, but her heart rebelled. She had never questioned God's will before, not even when she lost her mother and her sight. But now, for the first time in her life, she felt something dangerous rising inside her doubt. "Is this really what you want?" she asked into the darkness of her room. "After everything I've given, everything I've sacrificed, is this how it ends?" In silence. No answer came. And Sister Eleanor, exhausted and heartbroken, finally climbed into bed and fell into a fitful sleep. She had no way of knowing that in just 3 days everything would change. She had no way of knowing that a group of students would arrive at St. Grace Convent on a research project and stumble upon something extraordinary. She had no way of knowing that her story, her music, her gift was about to be heard by millions of people around the world. All she knew was that her piano was leaving, and with it she feared would go the last piece of her heart that still knew how to sing. Monday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine. Sister Eleanor went through her usual routine with mechanical precision, her heart heavy, her spirit depleted. She attended morning mass, where recorded hymns played through tinny speakers, the sound feeling hollow and wrong. She forced herself to eat breakfast, even though she had no appetite. She went to the garden to work her hands, pulling weeds, her mind far away. That afternoon, Mother Margaret made an announcement during afternoon prayers. "Sisters, we will be having visitors tomorrow. A group of graduate students from Juilliard School of Music in New York will be spending the day with us. They're working on a documentary about historic pianos in religious institutions across the South. They've heard about our piano and would like to include it in their film before it's sold." Sister Eleanor's hands tightened around her prayer beads. Of course people would want to document the piano now, when it was too late to save it. The irony was painful. The students arrived Tuesday morning in a van packed with camera equipment, sound gear, and notebooks. There were 5 of them, led by a young woman named Sarah Mitchell. Sarah was 24 years old, doing her master's degree in piano performance, and she had the kind of intense passion for music that reminded Sister Eleanor of herself at that age. Mother Margaret gave the students a tour of the convent, explaining its history, introducing them to some of the sisters. When they reached the chapel, Sarah's eyes immediately found the piano. "Oh my God," she breathed, walking toward it. "Look at this thing. It's incredible." Her companions followed equally entranced. They began examining the piano from every angle, taking photographs, running their hands over the wood, carefully testing a few keys. "The sound is rough, but you can hear the quality underneath," one of the students said. This was a really well-made instrument in its day. "What's its story?" Sarah asked Mother Margaret. "Has anyone played it recently?" Mother Margaret hesitated. "Well, yes. Sister Eleanor has played it for many years, but she's quite elderly now, and we've decided to sell the piano to help with other expenses." "Could we hear her play?" Sarah asked eagerly. "Even just a little bit." "It would be amazing for the documentary to capture the piano being played by someone who's lived with it for so long." Mother Margaret looked uncomfortable. "Sister Eleanor well, she's been quite upset about our decision to sell. I'm not sure she'd be willing. Could we at least ask Sarah?" pressed. "Please, we've come all this way and it would mean so much to have that human element in the film." Mother Margaret finally agreed and sent Sister Anne to find Sister Eleanor. Anne discovered her in the library, running her fingers over Braille texts, looking for a book to read. Sister Eleanor Anne said gently, "There are students here from Juilliard. They're making a documentary about the piano. They'd like to hear you play." Eleanor shook her head immediately. "No, I can't." "Please, sister, just one song. Think of it as a goodbye." "That's exactly why I can't." Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "Don't you understand? If I play now, if I say goodbye, it will kill me. I'd rather just let it go. Let them take it. Don't make me sit at that bench one more time knowing it's the last." Sister Anne knelt beside Eleanor's chair. "Sister, what if this is God's purpose? What if these students are supposed to be here? What if there's a reason you need to play one more time?" Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, but something in Anne's words struck her. What if there was a reason? What if God wasn't abandoning her but leading her somewhere she couldn't yet see? "All right," she finally whispered. "One song. Just one." Sister Anne led Eleanor to the chapel. The students fell silent when they saw her enter a small, elderly black woman in a nun's habit, her white cane tapping against the floor, her milky eyes staring at nothing. "You're Sister Eleanor?" Sarah asked gently. "I am," Eleanor replied. "We're so grateful you agreed to play for us," Sarah said. "We won't take much of your time. Just whatever you're comfortable sharing." Eleanor made her way to the piano bench, her heart pounding. She sat down, positioned her hands, and for a moment she couldn't move. Fear paralyzed her. Fear that this would hurt too much. Fear that she wouldn't be able to play through her tears. Fear that this really was goodbye. Sister Sarah prompted softly. "Are you all right?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "I'm sorry. It's just, this piano has been my companion for 56 years. Playing it one last time is harder than I expected." "What song are you going to play?" one of the other students asked. Eleanor thought for a moment, and then she knew. There was only one song that made sense. The same song she had played the night her world went dark. The same song her mother used to sing. A hymn she said simply. One my mother taught me. And then, before fear could stop her again, Sister Eleanor began to play. The first notes were tentative, shaky, but as she continued, something extraordinary happened. Her fingers found their confidence. The melody emerged from the broken piano, not as something damaged or worn, but as something achingly beautiful. The notes hung in the air of the chapel, like prayers made audible, like grief transformed into grace. Sister Eleanor played that hymn from memory, but she also played it from her heart. She played her mother's voice and her father's hands. She played the accident and the darkness and the years of learning to live without sight. She played her calling to religious life and 56 years of faithful service. She played every mass and every funeral and every moment of joy and sorrow that this piano had witnessed. The students stood frozen, their cameras forgotten. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. The others were equally moved, some with hands over their mouths, others with eyes closed, all of them recognizing that they were witnessing something rare and precious. Mother Margaret, who had been standing in the back of the chapel, felt something crack inside her carefully controlled heart. This wasn't performance. This wasn't about ego or personal gratification. This was worship in its purest form. This was a soul speaking to God in the only language it knew how to speak. When Sister Eleanor played the final note and lifted her hands from the keys, the silence in the chapel was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. They all just stood there trying to hold on to the moment, trying to understand what they had just experienced. Finally, Sarah found her voice. "Sister Eleanor," she whispered. I don't even have words. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Eleanor wiped tears from her cheeks. "Thank you. The piano deserves a proper goodbye. I'm glad I could give it that." "Sister." One of the other students said, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to ask you something. Are you blind?" The question seemed to surprise Eleanor. "Yes, I am. I have been since I was 13. "Why do you ask?" The students looked at each other in amazement. "Because we had no idea," Sarah said. "The way you played with such confidence, such precision, and your emotional expression, the way you felt the music. Sister Eleanor, do you know who you are? Do you have any idea how extraordinary you are?" Eleanor shook her head, uncomfortable with the praise. "I'm just a nun who plays piano. There's nothing extraordinary about that." Sister Sarah said, moving closer. "Would you mind if we recorded that? Would you play again so we can capture it properly for the documentary?" Eleanor hesitated. "I don't know. That was very difficult for me. I'm not sure I can do it again." "Please," Sarah said. "I know this is hard. But what you just did, what you just shared, needs to be documented. People need to hear this. They need to hear you." Sister Eleanor sat at that piano bench, torn between her desire to hide and a growing sense that maybe, just maybe, this was exactly what she was supposed to do. Maybe God hadn't abandoned her. Maybe he was just asking her to trust him one more time. "All right," she finally said. "One more time, for the documentary. But then I really do need to say goodbye." Sarah quickly set up cameras and audio equipment. The other students positioned themselves around the chapel. Mother Margaret remained in the back, watching and feeling ashamed of herself in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Whenever you're ready," Sister Sarah said softly. Sister Eleanor nodded, closed her sightless eyes, and began to play. And this time, with the cameras rolling and the world about to change, her music would reach far beyond the walls of that small chapel in Georgia. This time, the whole world would hear. Sister Eleanor's fingers found the keys with the certainty of old lovers reuniting. For a moment, she simply rested them there, feeling the cool ivory, the familiar texture worn smooth by decades of devotion. She took a breath, deep and steadying, and then she began. The hymn she chose was called "It Is Well With My Soul," written in the 19th century by a man who had lost everything and still found faith. Eleanor had always connected with that hymn, with its message of finding peace, even in the midst of unimaginable suffering. Today, playing it felt like a declaration, a testimony, a prayer that maybe somehow it could still be well with her soul, even as she said goodbye to the instrument that had been her voice for so long. The first chord rang out through the chapel, and despite the piano's age and disrepair, the sound was hauntingly beautiful. Sister Eleanor's hands moved with a grace that seemed impossible for someone who couldn't see, navigating the keys with absolute confidence, playing from a place deeper than memory, deeper than technique, deeper than conscious thought. As she played, something shifted in the atmosphere of the chapel. It was as if the walls themselves were listening, as if the very air had become reverent. The students had been prepared to record a nice performance by an elderly nun. What they were witnessing was something else entirely. This was art. This was soul. This was everything music was supposed to be, but so rarely achieved. Sarah, who had her camera trained on Sister Eleanor's face, watched through her viewfinder as a transformation took place. The elderly nun's expression, which had been tense with grief and hesitation, softened into something like peace. Her whole body seemed to relax into the music, to surrender to it, to become one with it. And the music itself was extraordinary. Eleanor's playing had a quality that defied description. It wasn't just technically proficient, though it was that. It wasn't just emotionally expressive, though it was that too. There was something else, something that made every listener feel like the music was speaking directly to them personally, intimately, about their own pain and hope and longing. When Eleanor reached the verse about sorrows, like sea billows rolling, her playing took on a different character. The notes became heavier, more dramatic, echoing the weight of suffering. But then, as she transitioned to the chorus, her hands lifted that weight, transforming it into something transcendent. It is well with my soul. The melody soared, full of hope and faith and unshakable certainty. Sister Anne, watching from the side of the chapel, remembered all the years she had heard Sister Eleanor play, all the masses and funerals and feast days, all the moments when Eleanor's music had brought comfort to the grieving joy, to the celebrating peace, to the anxious. She thought about how she and the other sisters had taken it for granted, this gift that lived among them, how they had become accustomed to beauty, had stopped really hearing. It had forgotten that what Sister Eleanor offered them was rare and precious. Mother Margaret, still standing in the back, felt something crumbling inside her. Her carefully constructed walls of practicality and efficiency were being dismantled, note by note. She had told herself she was making the right decision, the responsible decision. She had told herself that music was nice, but not necessary, that a convent needed to focus on prayer and service rather than artistic expression. But listening to Sister Eleanor play, she realized with painful clarity that she had been wrong. Terribly, tragically wrong. This wasn't just music. This was prayer. This was service. This was Sister Eleanor's entire soul poured out in offering to God and to the community. Taking away this piano wasn't a practical decision. It was an act of cruelty, whether intentional or not. It was silencing a voice that deserved to be heard. One of the students, a young man named Marcus, who was studying composition, found himself weeping openly. He had spent years learning music theory, studying the great composers, trying to understand what made certain pieces timeless. And here, in this aging nun playing a broken piano in a small chapel in rural Georgia, he was witnessing the answer. Great music wasn't about technical perfection or impressive virtuosity. It was about truth. It was about taking the raw material of human experience and transforming it into something that spoke to the deepest parts of who we are. Sister Eleanor moved into the second verse, and her playing became more complex, more nuanced. Her left hand created a foundation of steady chords, while her right hand wove intricate melodies above the two lines, intertwining like conversation, like dance, like love. The broken piano responded to her touch with a sound that shouldn't have been possible. Somehow, in her hands, its flaws became character, its age became wisdom, its imperfections became beauty. As she approached the final chorus, Eleanor's playing intensified. Her whole body was engaged, now swaying slightly with the rhythm, her foot pressing the sustain pedal with perfect timing, her hands moving with increasing passion. The music built and built, rising like a wave, and just when it seemed it couldn't possibly go higher, Eleanor brought it to the climactic moment, it is well with my soul." The final notes hung in the air, resonating through the chapel. And Sister Eleanor held her hands on the keys for a moment longer, letting the sound decay naturally, letting the silence return gradually rather than abruptly. When she finally lifted her hands and folded them in her lap, she was crying. "Forgive me," she said softly. "I always cry when I play that song." No one responded because everyone was crying. Sarah had tears streaming down her face behind her camera. Marcus was sobbing. The other students were wiping their eyes. Sister Anne was crying. Even Mother Margaret, standing in the shadows, had tears rolling down her cheeks. The silence stretched out sacred and profound, and then Sarah slowly lowered her camera. "Sister Eleanor," she said, her voice shaking. "I need to tell you something. Before we came here, I did some research on historic pianos in religious institutions, and I found something I need to ask you about." Eleanor turned her face in the direction of Sarah's voice, confused. "What do you mean?" Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through some notes. In 1961, a young girl named Eleanor Thompson from Alabama won a prestigious regional piano competition. She was only 14 years old, and she was blind. The judges said she was a prodigy, that she had the potential to be one of the great pianists of her generation. But after that competition, she disappeared from public records. No more competitions, no concerts, no music school. It was like she vanished. Sarah looked up at Sister Eleanor. "That was you, wasn't it?" The chapel went completely silent. Sister Eleanor's face had gone very still. "How did you find that?" she asked quietly. "I like to research the history of the places we visit," Sarah explained. "I was looking for stories about your piano, and I found stories about you instead. Sister, do you know what happened to the other pianists from that competition? 3 of them went on to have professional careers. One teaches at a conservatory. Another performs regularly in Europe. But you, the one everyone said was the most talented, you disappeared into a convent." Why, Sister Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but clear. "Because music was never meant to be a career for me. It was meant to be worship. When I lost my sight, I lost many things. But I gained something too. I gained an understanding that my gift wasn't mine to build a career with. It was God's to use however He saw fit." "But what about your potential?" one of the other students asked. "What about all the music you could have shared with the world?" Eleanor smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "I have shared music. For 56 years I've shared it with the people God put in my path. I've played at funerals and brought comfort to people in their darkest moments. I've played at masses and helped people feel closer to God. I've played in this chapel and given my sisters something beautiful to hold on to when the world felt ugly. That's not nothing. That's everything." Sarah wiped her eyes. "You're right. I'm sorry. Just watching you play, hearing your story, it breaks my heart that more people don't know about you." "Maybe they're not supposed to," Eleanor said. "Maybe my music was always meant for small audiences, for people who needed it in specific moments. Maybe that's more valuable than concert halls and recordings." Sister Anne spoke up from the side. "Sister Eleanor, you've never talked about that competition. You've never mentioned having that kind of recognition?" Why, Eleanor shrugged. "It was a lifetime ago, a different person. Before I took my vows, before I understood my calling. That girl who won that competition had dreams of becoming famous, of building a career. Sister Eleanor has different dreams. Better dreams, I think." "Can I ask what happened?" Marcus ventured. "Why did you stop competing?" Eleanor's face became even more still. "My father got sick. He needed care. And I realized that some things are more important than ambition. Family, love, sacrifice. Those are the things that matter. Music is beautiful, but it's not worth losing the people you love." The students absorbed this in silence. In an age where everyone was taught to pursue their dreams at all costs, to never give up on their ambitions, to prioritize personal fulfillment above all else, Sister Eleanor's choice seemed almost incomprehensible. And yet, sitting in that chapel, hearing her story, seeing the peace on her face, despite the pain of losing her piano, they couldn't help but wonder if maybe she understood something they didn't. Sarah made a decision. "Sister Eleanor, I'd like to ask your permission for something. I'd like to post a clip of you playing on social media. Just a minute or two. No pressure, no expectations. I just think people should hear this. They should hear you." Eleanor started to shake her head, but Mother Margaret surprised everyone by speaking up. "Sister Eleanor, if you're comfortable with it, I think you should say yes." Everyone turned to look at the Mother Superior. She stepped forward, her face showing emotion for the first time since the students had arrived. "I need to apologize," Mother Margaret said, her voice unsteady. "To Sister Eleanor and to all of you. I made a decision about this piano based on practicality and budget concerns. But I was wrong. I didn't understand what I was taking away. I didn't realize—" She paused, struggling with the words. "I didn't realize that some things are worth more than money, that some voices need to be heard even if they're expensive to maintain." She walked toward Sister Eleanor and knelt beside the piano bench. "Sister, please forgive me. The piano stays. We'll find the money somehow. We'll have fundraisers, we'll ask for donations, we'll do whatever it takes. But your music, your gift, your voice, it belongs here. And I was a fool to think otherwise." Sister Eleanor reached out and found Mother Margaret's hand. "There's nothing to forgive, Mother. You were trying to do what was best for the community." "No," Mother Margaret said firmly. "I was trying to do what was practical. There's a difference. And I forgot that sometimes the impractical things are the most necessary." Sister Eleanor squeezed Mother Margaret's hand, and something passed between them. Understanding, forgiveness, grace. Sarah cleared her throat. "So, Sister Eleanor, what do you say? Can I share a clip of your playing?" Sister Eleanor thought about it. Everything in her wanted to say no, wanted to stay hidden, wanted to remain Sister Eleanor, the humble nun, rather than Eleanor Thompson, the pianist. But something else whispered in her heart. Maybe this was God's plan. Maybe he was asking her to be brave one more time. "All right," she said quietly. "You can share it. But please, if you do make it clear that I'm not looking for attention or recognition. I'm just a nun who loves music and serves God." Sarah smiled through her tears. "I promise." That night, Sarah uploaded a 1-minute clip to multiple social media platforms. She titled it simply, "78-year-old blind nun plays piano at convent facing closure." She wrote a brief description, explaining what they had witnessed, the story of Sister Eleanor's gift and sacrifice, and the decision that had almost silenced her forever. And then she pressed post and went to sleep having no idea that she had just changed everything. Sarah woke up the next morning to her phone buzzing non-stop. Notifications were flooding in so fast her screen could barely keep up. Comments shares messages all related to the video of Sister Eleanor she had posted the night before. In less than 12 hours, the video had been viewed 500,000 times. By the end of the day, it had reached 5 million. Within a week, it had been watched by over 40 million people around the world. The video had struck a nerve in a way no one could have predicted. In a world saturated with auto-tuned perfection and carefully curated content, Sister Eleanor's raw, honest, emotionally vulnerable performance felt like finding water in a desert. People were starving for authenticity, and here was authenticity in its purest form. The comments section became a space of collective emotional catharsis. "I haven't cried like this in years," one person wrote. "This is what real music sounds like," wrote another. "I'm an atheist, but listening to her play makes me understand what people mean when they talk about the divine," said a third. Musicians and celebrities began sharing the video. A famous pop star posted it with the caption, "This is why I started making music. To feel this. To create this. Thank you, Sister Eleanor, for reminding me." A well-known conductor shared it and wrote, "In my 40 years of professional music, I've never heard anything more beautiful. This is art in its highest form." News organizations picked up the story. CNN, BBC, NPR, they all wanted interviews. The story had everything. An inspiring elderly protagonist, an underdog narrative, a crisis averted at the last moment, and music that could make even the hardest heart soften. But perhaps the most remarkable responses came from ordinary people sharing how Sister Eleanor's music had affected them personally. A woman wrote about listening to the video while sitting with her dying mother in a hospital room, and how it brought them both peace. A man described hearing it after losing his job and feeling for the first time in weeks like things might be okay. A teenager talked about struggling with depression and how Sister Eleanor's playing reminded her that beauty still existed in the world. One comment in particular went viral within the viral video. It was from a user named Patricia Russell, who wrote, "My grandmother was Margaret Patterson. She taught piano in Alabama in the 1960s. She used to tell me about a blind girl named Eleanor, who was the most naturally gifted musician she'd ever encountered. She said Eleanor gave up a future in music to care for her sick father, and it broke my grandmother's heart. Grandma passed away 10 years ago, but if she could see this video, if she could know that Eleanor never stopped playing, never stopped sharing her gift, she would be so proud. Thank you, Sister Eleanor, for proving that talent used in service is never wasted." The comment was shared thousands of times, and people wept over this connection between a teacher and a student spanning decades, finally honored through the miracle of technology. Back at St. Grace Convent, Sister Eleanor was blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding online. The convent didn't allow sisters to use social media, and Eleanor couldn't have accessed it anyway due to her blindness. She went about her normal routine, attending prayers, working in the garden, and yes, playing piano again now that Mother Margaret had reversed her decision. It was Sarah who drove back to the convent 3 days later to tell Sister Eleanor what was happening. She brought her laptop and explained to the elderly nun that her playing had touched millions of people around the world. Sister Eleanor sat in stunned silence as Sarah described the video's reach, the comments, the news coverage. But why, she finally asked. Why would millions of people care about an old nun playing piano in a small chapel? "Because you're extraordinary," Sister Sarah said simply. "Because your music speaks to something essential in the human soul. Because in a world that's often fake and shallow and cynical, you're real. You're genuine. You're proof that beauty and faith and sacrifice still matter." Eleanor shook her head, overwhelmed. "I don't understand. I'm nothing special. I'm just doing what I've always done." "That's exactly why it matters," Sarah replied. "You've been faithfully doing this extraordinary thing for decades without any recognition or reward. You didn't do it for fame or money or attention. You did it because it was your calling. And people are desperate to see that kind of authentic devotion. They need to be reminded that it exists." Over the following days, more news emerged. Donations began pouring into St. Grace Convent. People who had been touched by Sister Eleanor's story wanted to help ensure that her piano could be restored and that the convent would have the resources it needed. Within 2 weeks, the convent had received over $200,000 in donations. But perhaps the most significant contribution came from an anonymous donor who sent $50,000 specifically for the piano's restoration, along with a note that read, "For Sister Eleanor, may your music never be silenced again." Years later, it would be revealed that the anonymous donor was a wealthy music producer who had been contemplating suicide on the night he stumbled across Sister Eleanor's video. Her playing had given him a reason to keep living. The $50,000 was his way of saying thank you for saving his life. Mother Margaret was both humbled and overwhelmed by the response. "I almost silenced this," she said to Sister Anne one evening, as they looked at the stacks of donation letters. "I almost took away something that clearly means so much to so many people. How did I miss it? How did I not understand what we had here because we take miracles for granted when we see them every day?" Sister Anne replied, "Sister Eleanor has been our miracle for decades. We just forgot to notice." The piano was sent out for a complete restoration by one of the finest piano technicians in the country, who offered his services at a discount because he said it would be an honor to work on Sister Eleanor's piano. When it returned 2 months later, it looked and sounded like new, its tone rich and clear, its keys responding with perfect precision. The first person to play the restored piano was, of course, Sister Eleanor. The entire convent gathered in the chapel, along with Sarah and her fellow students who had been invited back for the occasion. When Eleanor sat down at the bench and played the first notes, everyone gasped. The difference was remarkable. The piano sang with a clarity and beauty it hadn't possessed in decades. Sister Eleanor played for an hour that day, moving through hymns and classical pieces and improvisations, her face radiant with joy. And when she finished, she turned to the gathered crowd and said something that would become another widely shared quote. "I learned something from all of this. I learned that sometimes God doesn't answer our prayers the way we expect. I prayed that the piano wouldn't be taken away. God's answer was to let it almost be taken away, so that it could be given back better than before. His plans are bigger than ours. His vision sees further than ours. And His love never lets us go even in the darkness." The room erupted in applause, and Sister Eleanor smiled that radiant smile of someone who had walked through fire and emerged not burned but refined. In the months following, the viral video life at St. Grace Convent changed in ways both expected and surprising. The influx of donations allowed for much-needed repairs to the buildings. The leaking roof was fixed, the heating system was updated, the plumbing was repaired, the gardens were expanded. For the first time in years, the sisters didn't have to worry about whether they could afford basic necessities. But the most significant change was in how the community understood Sister Eleanor's role. What had once been taken for granted was now recognized as the treasure it had always been. Mother Margaret established a music ministry at the convent with Sister Eleanor as its heart. They began hosting monthly concerts that were open to the public, allowing people from the surrounding community to experience Sister Eleanor's playing in person. These concerts became remarkable events. People would drive from hours away to attend. The small chapel that could hold maybe 80 people was always packed with people standing in the back and sitting on the floor. They came from all walks of life, musicians and non-musicians, believers and skeptics, young and old. They came because they had seen the video and needed to experience the real thing. They came because in a world that felt increasingly fragmented and angry, Sister Eleanor's music offered something rare peace. Before each concert, Sister Eleanor would speak briefly to the audience. She always said the same thing, more or less. "Thank you for coming. I want you to know that I don't play for applause or recognition. I play as prayer, as offering, as my way of saying thank you to God for the gift He gave me. If my music touches your heart, give the credit to Him, not to me." And then she would play, and the transformation that occurred in that chapel was palpable. People who came in stressed and anxious would leave peaceful. People who came in skeptical about faith would leave wondering if maybe there was something more. People who came in feeling alone would leave feeling connected to something larger than themselves. A music therapy program was established at the convent, with Sister Eleanor training younger sisters in how to use music for healing and comfort. They began visiting hospitals, nursing homes, and prisons, bringing music to people who needed it most. Sister Eleanor couldn't attend these visits herself due to her age and mobility challenges, but her spirit infused every note her students played. The documentary that Sarah and her fellow students had been working on was completed and submitted to film festivals. It won several awards and was eventually picked up by a major streaming service. The film, titled Seeing with the Soul, the sister, Eleanor Thompson story, was watched by millions more people and sparked conversations about faith, art, disability, and what it means to live a meaningful life. Sister Eleanor gave one interview for the documentary, and her words became some of the most quoted from the film. "People ask me if I'm angry about being blind. They ask if I wish I could see. And I tell them the truth. I've been blessed to see things that sighted people miss. I've seen music. I've seen faith. I've seen love. I've seen the face of God, not with my eyes, but with my heart. And that kind of seeing that's worth more than any sunset or painting or beautiful face. That's the seeing that lasts forever." One of the most touching developments came when the convent began receiving letters from blind children and their families. Parents wrote about how Sister Eleanor had given their children hope, had shown them that blindness didn't have to limit their dreams. Some asked if they could visit the convent. Others asked for advice about helping their children pursue music. Sister Eleanor responded to every single letter, personally dictating her responses to Sister Anne, who would write them out. To one young girl who was losing her sight due to a degenerative condition and was terrified of the darkness to come, Sister Eleanor wrote, "Dear sweet child, I know you're afraid. I was afraid too. But let me tell you a secret. The darkness isn't as dark as you think. Yes, you'll lose the ability to see with your eyes, but you'll gain the ability to see with your heart, and that kind of vision is stronger and clearer than any eyes could ever give you. The world will try to tell you that you're limited, that you're less than, that you can't do things. Don't believe them. You are not your blindness. You are a soul with infinite potential, and your disability is just one small part of who you are. Find what makes your heart sing, and do that thing with all your might. For me, it was music. For you, it might be something else. But whatever it is, pursue it fearlessly. The darkness cannot stop you unless you let it." The letter was shared by the girl's mother on social media and went viral again, inspiring thousands more people who were facing their own forms of darkness, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual. Mother Margaret underwent her own transformation during this time. The woman who had been so focused on practicality and efficiency became softer, more attuned to the spiritual and artistic needs of her community. She started attending Sister Eleanor's concerts, sitting in the back and weeping openly at the beauty of it. She began to understand that leading a convent wasn't just about keeping the lights on and the bills paid. It was about nurturing the souls in her care, about creating space for beauty and wonder, about remembering that people need more than just physical sustenance to thrive. One evening, Mother Margaret asked to speak with Sister Eleanor privately. They sat together in the chapel, and Mother Margaret took Sister Eleanor's hands in her own. "Sister, I need to thank you," Mother Margaret said. "You've taught me something I should have already known. You've taught me that sometimes the impractical things are the most essential, that beauty matters, that art matters, that music matters. I'm sorry it took almost losing your voice for me to understand that." Sister Eleanor squeezed her hands. "Mother, you were doing your best with the information and resources you had. That's all any of us can do. And look at what God did with your decision. If you hadn't decided to sell the piano, those students never would have come. The video never would have been made. Millions of people never would have heard this story. God used even your mistake to create something beautiful." "How do you do that?" Mother Margaret asked. "How do you find grace in everything? How do you never seem bitter or angry or resentful?" Sister Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "I spent a long time being bitter and angry," she finally said. "When I lost my mother and my sight, I raged against God. I couldn't understand why He would give me this gift and then take away my ability to use it. But over time I realized something. The gift was never about my eyes. It was never about seeing music on a page or watching my hands on the keys. The gift was in my heart, in my soul, in the connection between my spirit and the music itself. Blindness took my sight, but it couldn't touch that. And once I understood that I stopped being angry, I started being grateful." "Grateful," Mother Margaret asked. "For being blind. Grateful for what I gained through blindness," Sister Eleanor clarified. "I gained depth. I gained understanding. I gained a relationship with music that I don't think I would have had if I could see. Sometimes our greatest wounds become our greatest strengths. Sometimes the things that break us are actually breaking us open, making space for more light to get in." Mother Margaret wept, and Sister Eleanor held her, and in that moment of vulnerability and truth, both women were healed of something they hadn't even realized needed healing. Today, Sister Eleanor Thompson is 80 years old. She still lives at St. Grace Convent. She still plays piano regularly. Her hands have more arthritis now, and some mornings it takes her longer to warm up. But when she plays, the music is as beautiful as ever. Maybe more beautiful because it carries even more years of wisdom and faith and lived experience. The convent thrives now, supported by a community that recognizes its value. Young women are entering religious life again, drawn partly by the story of Sister Eleanor and what she represents. The music ministry continues to grow, reaching more people, bringing healing to more broken places. Sister Eleanor's story became famous, yes, but she remained unchanged by fame. She's still the same humble, gentle woman she's always been. She still wakes before dawn for prayer. She still works in the garden. She still lives a life of service and devotion. The only difference is that now more people know about her. And knowing about her, they're inspired to live differently themselves. The lesson of Sister Eleanor's life isn't complicated. It's actually quite simple. It's this: your gifts are never wasted when they're used in service to something greater than yourself. Your disabilities don't define you unless you let them. Your circumstances don't determine your value. And sometimes the world needs exactly what you have to offer, even if you can't see it yourself. Sister Eleanor spent most of her life playing for small audiences in a small chapel in a small town. She never sought recognition. She never pursued fame. She never tried to prove anything to anyone. She just faithfully used her gift day after day, year after year, decade after decade, trusting that it mattered even when no evidence suggested it did. And it turned out she was right. It mattered more than she could have imagined. Her music has now touched millions of people. Her story has inspired countless others to pursue their own callings despite obstacles. Her example has reminded the world that authentic devotion still exists, that beauty still matters, that faith can still move mountains. Sister Eleanor couldn't see the keys when she played, but she helped the world see something far more important. She helped us see that darkness, whether in our eyes or in our circumstances, cannot extinguish a light that burns from within. She helped us see that it's never too late to be heard, never too late to matter, never too late to offer our gifts to the world. She helped us see that the most extraordinary lives are often lived in the most ordinary places by people who simply show up day after day and do the work they're called to do, whether anyone's watching or not. And perhaps most importantly, she helped us see that music, real music, isn't about technical perfection or impressive virtuosity. It's about soul. It's about truth. It's about taking the raw material of our lived experience, all the joy and pain and loss and hope, and transforming it into something that speaks to the deepest parts of who we are. Sister Eleanor Thompson couldn't see the piano keys, but she could see what mattered. And in teaching us to see it too, she gave the world a gift far more valuable than any concert performance or recording could ever be. She gave us permission to believe that our own gifts matter, that our own voices deserve to be heard, and that faithful service in obscurity is never wasted. The last time Sister Eleanor was asked about her life, and whether she had any regrets, she thought for a long moment and then said this: "Regrets, no. I don't have regrets. I have gratitude. Gratitude for every moment, every challenge, every loss, and every gift. My life didn't turn out the way I expected when I was a little girl playing piano for the first time. It turned out better, because I learned that seeing isn't about eyes, it's about heart. And my heart has seen such beauty, such love, such grace. I've been blind for 66 years, but I've never been in darkness. Because God's light, that light doesn't need eyes to be seen. It just needs a willing soul. And I've tried every day to be that, a willing soul. And so Sister Eleanor continues playing her piano, living her life being exactly who she was called to be. A blind woman who sees more than most. An elderly nun who moves young hearts. A humble servant who inspired millions. Sister Eleanor Thompson couldn't see the keys, but she helped the world see everything that matters. And that, in the end, is the greatest music of all.